there's this big price now, um, Syria, and it just kind of fell into their lap. Brilliant, just brilliant. Except what if it isn't? What if it's a trap? What if it's the, bone that they're gonna choke on? And that makes sense because that's how, that's how Soviet Union fell in Afghanistan. The Americans cleverly drew them into Afghanistan. They took the bait, they went in there, walked in, and then they got attrited and destroyed. And they poured more and more and more military resources in there, took more and more casualties until they had to finally give up. I think that this is the exact same gambit that is being, the same trap that was sprung for the Western Empire there.
You're watching Capital Cause, and my name is Danny. Today's guest is Alex Krainer. Alex, super stoked to have you on the show today.
Thank you, Danny. Good to be with you again.
Yeah, likewise. Let's just dive right in, Alex. What is the top story for you right now? What is occupying your headspace at the moment?
Oh, obviously Syria.
Yeah.
So it's 9 December now as we're recording. Yesterday, I woke up to the news that Syria had fallen, and I couldn't believe it. I was just dumbfounded. I could not make any sense out of it because it went from HTS launching the attack, the new and improved Jabhat al-Nusra front, to Damascus falling and Bashar al-Assad gone in just over 10 days,
Yeah.
which is, how
It
does
was like
that
they
make any sense?
it was like they took a tour bus throughout the entire country. It didn't even stop for pictures, going from one city to the next with no resistance.
With no resistance, which so the the news media and the social networks are chock full of explanation. It's all the obvious stuff, it was corrupt, low morale, disarray. Y- you know, they didn't prepare. They were taken by surprise, and all that. None of that makes any sense. None of it is even necessarily true. I mean, it's all partly true, but partly it isn't. It can be. This is the same Syria under the same Bashar al-Assad that resisted a concerted attack by US proxies, UK, uh, Al-Qaeda, Jabhat al-Nusra, ISIS, Khorasan, all of these assorted groups with full support of the whole Arab League by themselves. And they resisted for 4 years before, in 2015, Russia finally came to their rescue. And now this same Syria, same Bashar al-Assad, folded in 10 days, even though the situation in the last, they prevailed 8 years ago. So December 2016, they finally lifted the siege of Aleppo. And since then, they had 8 years to rebuild, regroup, reinforce their defenses. And they knew that there was this terror network
In Idlib, yeah.
brewing in
Like
Idlib.
they had just left it alone
I
for
mean,
4 years.
yeah, and well, but they knew that it's inconceivable that they didn't know because this Mohammed bin al Jolani or Jawlani or whatever his name is, it changes every few years. He's been vocal about taking Aleppo, about going all the way down to Damascus. They knew this. Uh,
Yeah, and for people who may not know, this guy is ex Al Qaeda, ex ISIS.
yes,
This is not like
exactly. So he has been on the designated terror list of the US State Department since 2013. And like the rebranded al-Nusra, the HTS, Hayat al-Tahrir, uh, is that what it's called? I forget the full
something like
name.
that. Yeah.
they've been on the State Department's terror list since 2018. And then, you know, how did things change in the region since 2016, 8 years ago? Well, Russia and Iran went from being kind of cold to hostile to one another to being close allies,
Hmm.
and both of them fully supportive of Syria. Um, Iran and Saudi Arabia are no longer enemies. The Arab League, with the exception of Qatar, are now were supportive of Bashar al-Assad's regime, and they folded in 10 days. I don't get it. So I you know after I kind of digested it for about 24 hours since I learned the news, I came to the conclusion that, maybe they, not Syria necessarily, but Iran and Russia, they sprang a trap for the empire. The last quagmire, because this fight was coming anyway. The Jabhat al-Nusra well, I mean, the HTS was there in Idlib, the biggest, like the biggest terror grouping, which was threatened. They've been, according to US reports, they've been attacking Syrian positions nonstop since 2022. So this surprised nobody. The fact that they came by surprise, um, just is inconceivable to me.
Hmm.
That the Russians signed um, a truce with duplicitous backstabbing Erdogan, and then they completely took their eye off the ball and just thought that situation is settled. We have nothing to worry about there. That's inconceivable to me. And so the only explanation that makes sense to me is that this was by design, because also the way the Syrian army folded, it wasn't just one place.
It was
It was a place after a place after a place after a place.
from the top
So,
too. Orders from the
yeah,
generals.
exactly. So it was coordinated. So they were given the orders to pull back, to demobilize, to melt away. And then the question is why? Because, even in places like Aleppo and Hama, they had their best units. If these HTS people had to engage in urban warfare, it would have taken weeks or months to overcome the resistance. And they did have strong reinforcements, strong.
Well, from what I've read, I mean, the Syrian military outnumbered them 10-1. It was like they have 200,000 military men compared to the 15 or 20,000 that actually invaded.
Yeah, exactly. So HTS had like about 15,000, and I don't know what else they had. But even, like, even with that, even if we say there were 30,000, they they would have to outnumber the defending troops who expected the attack. So there must be a reason why they were ordered to demobilize, to just let him in. And what could possibly be the reason? Well, here's how I make sense of it. First of all, we have to understand that this conflict is part of the same conflict as Ukraine. Okay. Um, 2 days after the this attack started on Wednesday last week, 27th November, on 29th, on Friday, Putin spoke at what was it called? Sana, not Sana.
In
Gosh.
Doha? Was it Doha? Or no, it was
No, no, no. It wasn't in Doha. It was in. Yeah, it's just escaping me. It's like one of those things that But it doesn't matter. It'll come back. It'll come back to me. He spoke and he answered a question from a journalist about the Ukraine conflict, and he said, "I just, to the effect that I just want to make clear that in Ukraine we're not going to go for like a ceasefire or the freezing of the conflict along any demarcation lines. We're going for the final resolution. That is the only thing that we're interested in." And you know. What does he mean by the final resolution to this conflict? I think that what he means is a complete redrawing of the security infrastructure, of the security architecture on the Eurasian continent. And the way things are now is you have, the security architecture is defined by British geopolitics, Mackinder, the pivot area, the heartland, and the crescent of crises, because the idea has always been to prevent the pivot power, i.e., Russia, to emerge and create an alternative empire. It will be surrounded by this crescent of crisis from the Mediterranean to the Koreas. So it would always be drawn into quagmires, Chechnya, Dagestan, mm, Afghanistan, Syria, Ukraine, and so forth, so that it's always being bled and weakened. And the Russians want an end to this. And it's not just the Russian, it's the whole SCOs, the Shanghai Cooperation
Hmm.
Organization, the Iranians, the the whole axis of resistance in the Middle East, the Chinese, North Koreans, Indians now, they all have a vital interest in this. And part of that game, perhaps at the moment, the most important component of the game is the Middle East and Syria. So what they've done now is they've drawn in the Turkish US proxies,
Hmm.
Syria National Army and HTS and friends, because it's a group of these uh, jihadi units and organizations, which are also mutually hostile to each other. So not a
They're fighting each other right now. I
they
mean,
are
you
fighting
already
each other right now. The Turks apparently already froze the assets of the HTS. The HTS only exists because the Turks have incubated them, so they can end them
Yeah.
tomorrow.
And even within the HTS, there's battles going on right now between the moderates, the moderate wing of the HTS, and the more hardline wing. I mean, and then you have the stuff that's going on the border of Turkey between their proxies and the Kurdish proxies,
Yeah,
and then
yeah,
the stuff that's going on the southern border with Israel. I mean, it is becoming Libya 2.0.
yeah, exactly. So it again begs the question: how could Syria have folded to this gaggle of all these people have on their side is violence, but not even like they busted into Syria on pickup trucks and improvised armored vehicles, not even on real armored vehicles and tanks. So they should have been easy targets, but they were let in for some reason. And then Israel came in next, which was another thing that was expected. And Israel started bombing the crossings between Hezbollah and Syria, between Lebanon and Syria, the day they concluded the truce with Hezbollah, which was exactly the same day when HTS launched their incursion into Syria. So the only place you walk into that easily is a trap. And so once you remember that, how did the West finally break the Soviet Union? In the exact same way they drew them into Afghanistan.
Mm.
So that was the Soviet Union's quagmire. It's actually not rocket science. It makes sense. And so I suspect, I could be wrong, but I suspect that somehow between the Russians and the Iranians and the Syrian army, that they made a decision, let's avoid the bloodshed, let's draw them in, and then they'll be faced with, first of all, their forces will splinter, which, as you mentioned, is already happening, and then we'll attrit them. We'll destroy them through attrition, and then consolidate Syria. Probably it'll end up dominated by Iran. And I've seen already reports that Israeli intelligence and military have become very suspicious about this, and they now see that they've walked into a trap, probably.
Interesting.
And
But
so,
doesn't Iran lose its supply route through Syria that's
you
funneling
mean
oil through
Hezbollah?
to Hezbollah?
Well, yes, that is the case, but Hamas hasn't had any supply routes over this, since last October. They've been kind of isolated. It hasn't they Israel hasn't been able to defeat them. They they don't have to defeat Israel. They just have to survive. And I think that Hezbollah is probably prepared to survive an extended period of time without supplies. So they're not just going to fold like a house of cards. That's not what Hezbollah is. And so the only way this situation makes sense to me is if there's a different agenda afoot. If it isn't, and I think that, like, I'm starting to suspect even that Erdogan was on board with this, because him backstabbing the BRICS, the SCO, the Chinese, the Russians, the Iranians, and potentially drawing the ire of the Turkish people, who are dead against supporting, Israeli and Western schemes in the Middle East. That doesn't make much sense either. Uh, the Russians have dealt with Erdogan. They've designated Turkey as the major energy hub for the Western markets, puts them in a very powerful position. They're completing a nuclear power plant in Turkey as we speak. Russian engineers are training Turkish engineers to run it. The Chinese are bringing huge investments into Turkey. The BYD is building a $1 billion car manufacturing plant in the west of Turkey. Alibaba is investing 2 billion, and so on and so forth. Very, very, very substantial investments, very strong interest in staying with BRICS and keeping friendly relations with Russia, Azerbaijan, Iran, China, and so on. And what do they gain by backstabbing everybody collectively? How how does that improve? I mean, you would have to think that Erdogan just went mad, that he's absolutely irrationally obsessed with, consolidating the Great Tyrrhenia, even though it's hardly achievable, and taking Aleppo, taking the territory. In Idlib, he has about 4 million Syrians, 90% of whom depend on humanitarian aid that's coming from Turkey through there every day. I mean, that's a huge drain, and I would expect that he wants to be rid of it. He's also vulnerable to Iranians arming the Kurds against Turkish forces, and then he has a hostile entity on his border to the south and the east. It's just completely crazy. And so is everybody crazy or is this a trap? And then, like there's the Russian way of war. The Russians don't care about territory very much. They are very keen on preserving uh, the forces, the troops, and the weaponry. And so, when the Russians got invaded by Napoleon, they couldn't beat him in a frontal war, so they let him in all the way to Moscow, and then treated them. When they got invaded by Hitler, largest invasion force ever assembled, they let him in and then treated them. And maybe this is the thinking that formed this is what led to the orders to the Syrian troops to disband. Let him in, we'll attrit them with time. And so I guess, I don't know, that makes sense to me. And I think the time will tell. I can't say. Maybe I'm wrong, but we'll find out with time.
Doesn't Russia lose its warm water port in the process as well? I mean, how valuable of a trade is that to Russia?
Well, potentially yes, but I don't know. They still have Crimea. Like their military assets are very much long range, and then they have the alliance with Iran, which is present in the region, and it has many proxies, including Hezbollah. So, it it's not necessarily a loss that they cannot recover.
Mm.
If they lose Tartus, which I think is not a is
I
not
think
a
they've already left Tartus and Latakia, from what I've read.
completely.
Hmm.
Okay, yeah, I suspect that it's not a loss that they cannot recover. They're in the Black Sea. Uh, they've been strangely soft on Turkey in the sense of they didn't lash out and accuse Erdogan of betrayal. I don't know. We'll find
Yeah.
out.
Hey guys, quick pause. I won't take too much of your time, but if you're looking to add into your gold and silver stack, please consider Miles Franklin. More specifically, email them, info@milesfranklin.com, and tell them that Capital Cosmos sent you in the subject line to unlock special pricing that you won't find on the website. In the unlikely event that you don't like the prices, you could always not buy. There's no commitment necessary, but I do recommend Miles Franklin for a number of reasons. The customer support is top notch, the prices are great, and I know the people there. Great people all around. So with all that said, let's get back to the video. Thanks, guys.
Yeah, it is a chaotic tinderbox. I mean, I'm sure
Very.
you've seen the meme where it says Pentagon backed rebels fight CIA backed rebels, right? In
Yeah,
Syria.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
So it very well could be a trap for the US. In what ways could it be a trap for the West though? Like how can you kind of unpack that in more detail?
Okay, so this is how I think it could be a trap. Syria is extremely important for them, for A, to secure Israel, B, to be able to eventually try to take down Iran, C, as a secure territory they need to draw their gas and oil and gas pipelines to the Mediterranean from uh, Qatar. So they want it very easily. So now it might be the prize which draws more and more resources as they try to keep and defend that prize, you
Hmm.
know? And so now they're going to be motivated to try to secure this and that, bring troops, bring weaponry, bring give more and more resources to these jihadi groups. And these jihadi groups are largely mercenaries, which means that
They're not
it's
even
not
Syrian. For a lot of these guys aren't
They're
even
not,
serious.
yeah, exactly. So,
Tajikis, Uzbekis, Uyghurs. I mean, they're from
yeah,
all over the world.
yeah. And, mercenaries will often go to the highest bidders. They don't have loyalty. So, if the Russians, the Iranians, the Chinese offer them a better deal, they could switch sides from one day to the next. And so I think that it's an extremely important thing for the Russians, the Iranians, the Chinese, the whole SCO organization to finally eject Western interests from the Middle East. And I think this is a way to do it. And the same. Okay, so let's try to make sense out of this because right now it seems that the Americans, the British, the French, the Turks, the Israelis, sheer genius. They just scored this brilliant victory in 10 days' time that nobody expected. I mean, literally nobody expected that this would happen. How the hell did it happen? And I think that it was a lure. But if you wind back the clock a bit longer, 30 years time, go back to 1993, we had the Wolfowitz Doctrine, right? And Wolfowitz Doctrine was written in 1993 when the USA was in its zenith, militarily, diplomatically, economically, in every way. It was seen as almost invincible. Their power projection was irresistible around the world. And the whole doctrine was preserving that unipolar moment, staying the undisputed power in the world and nobody dares defy, that nobody dares to oppose. And since then until now, 31, 32 years later, are they closer to securing the realm, the new American century, or are they farther away from it? And as I look around, they're light years farther away from it. Uh, you know, Russia wasn't supposed to emerge as a worthy adversary. China was supposed to be contained. Iran was supposed to be overtaken and regime changed by now. Um, they're losing in Ukraine, which was extremely important to them. It was the most important battle in the whole conflict. They lost it. They're not losing it. They already lost it. And so now, they lost. They pretty much lost Georgia, which was supposed to open the next front against Russia. So, there's this big price now, Syria, and it just kind of fell into their lap. Brilliant, just brilliant. Except what if it isn't? What if it's a trap? What if it's the, bone that they're going to choke on? And that makes sense because that's how Soviet Union fell in Afghanistan. The Americans cleverly drew them into Afghanistan. They took the bait. They went in there, walked in, and then they got attrited and destroyed. And they poured more and more and more military resources in there, took more and more casualties until they had to finally give up. I think that this is the exact same gambit that is being, the same trap that was sprung for the Western Empire there. And so, Sergei Karaganov, who has Vladimir Putin's ear, formulated what the strategy is from the Russian side. And he said something to the effect that we have to kind of assist the United States to transition from being the global hegemon to just being a normal major power, one of the peers, among the major powers in the
Multipolar
world.
world.
Exactly. So to make that transition as peacefully and bloodlessly as possible, and then completely contain Europe and European powers uh, into their own
Hmm.
playpen. there to, to steep in their own juices, as he said. And in that context, what they're doing in Syria is would make sense and it would be consistent. But again, it's a guess. I could be wrong, but I think that we will only know this with time. But, what would be interesting, especially to followers of your channel, is what does that mean for, for the rest of us? And I think that it might mean much, much higher energy prices over the coming years because this, like if we're looking at an attrition warfare
Hmm.
against the West, then we're looking at years of warfare, not, like not a couple of weeks, but maybe a couple of years. And that means maybe major disruption in oil supplies from the Middle East, um, loss of control over where those oil resources flow,
Yeah.
whether
And
going
these
to,
guys might spill over to the Gulf countries too.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
in Lebanon.
Oh yeah,
I mean, they share a border, obviously. I mean,
yeah,
there's a good chance there's spillover in, all the bordering countries.
yeah, exactly. And so, we're looking at major instability. So I would say very likely higher prices of oil, higher prices of precious metals. And for the rest, it's very hard to say. But I would say further decline of Western currencies, especially the euro, the yen, and the British pound. I think the dollar might fare relatively better. Further rise in interest rates. Again, particularly Europe, Britain, and Japan. Less so the United States. And I think we've already seen this because, I started suspecting that these things would be unfolding from the day that United States left the abandoned Afghanistan.
Hmm.
From the day they evacuated from Afghanistan, and since then I've been watching the German Bund, the British gilt, U.S. Treasuries. And U.S. Treasury, and I predicted that they would all be going down. And the U.S. Treasuries have fallen about half as much as the British and European ones have. And that's over a period of 3 years. So we're talking from August 2021 until today, a little bit more than 3 months. And that's a long period of time to see the dynamic evolving. That
Right.
you know, I think that the United States is basically using Europe and Britain and Japan uh, as an airbag in this crash.
I mean, it seems like you're right with your prognosis here, Alex. I mean, I'm looking at the gold price right now. Gold is up $36 as of right now at the open. It's 10:30 a.m. Eastern on December 9th at the time of this recording. Silver is also up, closing in on that $33 price tag. Oil is up 2.4%, up a buck 65. So yeah, I mean, energy, bullish gold and silver. And on the flip side of the coin, the broad markets are pretty much sideways to slightly down. So there you go.
But we're talking equities, right?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, you see, this is, when in these circumstances, one would expect like, oh, the equity prices are going to go out, going to go down, they're going to collapse. But this is not what necessarily happens because I think that the the main event is that the currencies are imploding, gradually, but they are imploding. And so, what the central banks are forced to do, and they're already doing it, is to backstop all the bad losses on the books of the banking system. They have to kind of flood the system with liquidity
Hmm.
through repos or whatever facilities that they prime in these circumstances. And so as the liquidity goes into the markets and the markets start to lose confidence in the currency, they start shoveling it straight into the stock markets because they have to get rid of it because they understand that they're losing purchasing power. And what are you going to do? You can buy Bitcoin, you can buy gold and silver commodities, but these are all tiny markets, uh, relatively speaking.
Right.
So the bulk of it ends up going into treasuries and into equities. But even treasuries, at a certain point, I'm very curious what the effect of Syria is going to be on the treasury markets because I suspect that maybe for this until everybody sobers up, this moment of like celebration, then they might go up. This might boost the confidence in the Western world and the Western system, and consequently lift the prices of British, American, European treasuries temporarily. But then, once they sober up, they're going to be bailing out. And then, if you suspect that the governments are going to be defaulting on their debts, then all you're left with is equities. And then, as we've seen in countries like Zimbabwe in 2008, 2009, in Venezuela, in Argentina, in Israel in the 1980s, 86, I think, in Germany in 1921, 22, we saw that at a certain point the equity markets go vertical.
Right. The crack up boom.
Yeah, a crack up boom, and I suspect that this is the scenario that we might be looking at over the next couple of years. And so I think this is the secret of why, even though we're at top valuations historically, doesn't make much sense except in this context. And so, all these predictions, Jeremy Grantham and all these economists who have been predicting a 50% collapse in equities, it keeps not happening. It keeps melting up slowly. I think this is the reason why.
Interesting. And you expect commodities to take part?
Yeah, I do. I think that commodities are going to go up, that they're probably going to go up strongly. I think that they're going to be going up even more than the equity markets
Mm.
for a few reasons. A, the instability, and there's going to be supply constraints. I think as we have stagflation, there's going to be shortages at some point of key commodities. And C, commodity markets are much, much smaller than equity and treasury markets. And so they're going to be crowded with, going into gold and silver is already obvious. I think that soon it's going to be quite obvious that you should also have exposure to energy markets. And already now, things like coffee, frozen orange juice, cocoa are, if not at, very near historical all-time highs. So soft commodities are performing very strongly already. Grains, not so much yet, but they probably will. And then what else is left? Yeah, industrial metals. They're looking pretty dead at the moment, but they'll catch up.
Yeah. So last time I had you on, Alex, you mentioned that the UK was in trouble of was in danger of a debt collapse. Most likely the first country to collapse from a debt crisis. Do you still see it that way, or has your
Well,
view changed at all?
yes and no. I don't think that they're going to collapse, as in into a depression and a economic, collapse in that sense. Because what they have done in July of this year, the Bank of England has opened the monetary spigots by entering into the repo market. And we don't know how much it is, but it's already within a few weeks. I think within 5 weeks, the British repo market, the Bank of England's chunk participation in the repo market grew to over 50 billion British pounds. And this is very, very obscure. They're not advertising this. They're not disclosing the amounts. They're never going to disclose who gets the liquidity in the repo markets. But the effect of it is that the banking system is going to be preserved. So it's not going to implode. We're not going to have like a grinding halt and the 1929 style, depression like in the United States back then. But what we are going to get is an acceleration of inflation over time, which I think at some point might even hit a hyperinflationary level. So my prediction is stagflation with a risk of hyperinflation in the end, um, probably a couple of years down the road. But the time interval is anybody's guess.
Gotcha. Before we sign off, I want to take it back to Syria as we close things out. Trump came out with a tweet the other day mentioning he threw some red meat for the neocons. Assad shouldn't be there. We're happy this happened. But he closed off the tweet, I don't know if you saw it, by saying the U.S. should not get involved. And I can't help but wonder if there's a bit of a Hegelian dialectic that's also attempting to be played by NATO and the West in general. By putting in all these Al Qaeda guys, now they have a reason to go into Syria. Is Trump signaling to the neocons that I know what you're doing and we're not going to go in there regardless? What do you think of that? What do you think of that tweet?
It's very difficult for me to interpret Donald Trump at this point because he's saying one thing to his voting public. He's saying a different thing to to deep state establishment. Look, I think that the level of desperation in the ruling establishment in the West is such that they are ready for anything. Uh, I grew suspicious that they might orchestrate a false flag attack in London. I don't know if I was right or wrong, but I suspect that it's a possibility. Um, you see them canceling elections in places like Romania. You see them attempting color revolutions in places like Georgia. They did a regime change in Bangladesh a couple of weeks ago. They are going into Syria. They're going to try to overthrow Iran still. Uh, I think that the level of desperation is such that they are trying everything they can to kick off a massive escalation towards World War III, which could potentially give them an excuse to declare some kind of a martial law in the United States and to prevent Trump even from being inaugurated. And so Trump is there, I think he has to manage their expectations. I think he has to I wouldn't say appease, but he has to kind of try to hypnotize them into relaxing so that they let the power transition take place.
Right.
And I think that this is for him and for his team, this is potentially the most immediate danger. What's happening in Ukraine, what's happening in Syria, what's happening with China, what's happening in Africa, all of these are um, distant seconds
Yeah.
to him actually surviving to inauguration and being inaugurated to actually be able to take power
Yeah.
and to do anything at all. And so I would assume that a lot of his messaging, maybe even all of his messaging at the moment is aimed at that, at making sure that these people actually give him a chance and not
That he's on
assassinate.
their side. Right.
Yeah, exactly. To give them the signal that he's at least amenable to their agenda and that he will not jeopardize their interests, at least not too radically.
Yeah. Because it does appear like it's being set up that Syria has fallen to Al Qaeda, and now we have to get involved for the security of the region. And by the
Yeah,
time you have a new administration in, they're going to have to deal with the mess. They're going to have to deal with U.S. military in Syria, and they're going to have a messy war, and it's going to obfuscate the next administration's agenda.
yeah, yeah, exactly. So I think for all those reasons, it's very, very difficult to try to interpret Donald Trump's tweets and messages and speeches. I think that he's only very clear on domestic politics. There he's much, much clearer,
Yep.
and his messaging makes much better sense. When he talks about foreign politics and foreign policy, it's all over the place, and I don't even want to try to interpret it because God knows why he says what he says and what his ulterior motive is. But you
With
know,
Trump, it's better to judge him by his actions. I've noticed
exactly,
his rhetoric. I mean, just look at his first term. I mean, his rhetoric was one thing, but his actions were another.
exactly. I fully agree. And on one case after another, North Korea, Syria, Afghanistan, Germany, Europe, NATO, it's. I think that he's been fairly consistent in his actions, in that all of his actions and all of his attempted actions were aimed at rolling back the American empire, you know, un uncommitting from American imperial projects.
Right. Well, Alex, it's been a pleasure. Anything else you want to talk about before we wrap up that we didn't get a chance to?
Oh, well, I just want to mention, like that if we have some kind of a massive high casualty false flag attack between now and 20th of January, it's probably going to be blamed on Russia, and it's probably going to be falsely blamed on Russia. I believe that it will be orchestrated by UK and US deep state actors in order to kick off World War III. So for anybody listening,
Mm,
don't fall for the false flag.
yeah, that's a seed to be planted in the back of your minds. Well, Alex, it's been a pleasure. Where can people find you?
Well, they can find me on Twitter. My handle is @nakedhedgie, and I have two Substack publications, one for, readers and one for traders. One is Alex Krainer's Substack, and the other one is a Trend Compass, something like that, something to the effect of Trend Compass. Alex Krainer's Trend Compass, maybe, or iSystem Trend Compass.
Gotcha. We'll have the links to those down below, so be sure to check them out, guys. Alex, thank you so much for coming on. Guys, thank you so much for watching. And with all that said, if you got value out of this video, remember to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Continue getting more videos like this. If you agreed with anything we had to say, if you agreed with Alex, type "Go Alex Go" in the comments section. If you disagreed with any of our insights and analysis, let us know in the comments. I do read the comments, so really interested to get your thoughts. And then finally, check me out on Substack, capitalcosm.substack.com, where you can get ad-free and early access to all of my videos and more. Link to that is down below as well. With all that said, I'll catch you next episode. Thanks, guys.
Good to be with you all.